As the sun is setting down outside and looking forward to a cozy fireside chat this evening, we have the last session coming up of the day. Customer data is the most critical strategic asset for an organization. This session aims to give you deep insights on how you can use data to drive innovation. Valuing your customer and using data to provide and drive for innovation is the topic for this fireside chat this evening, which will be moderated by Shubhajit Majumdar, Director, KPMG. Please welcome him on stage.
So very good evening, Samir. Samir, just give us a background of what you've been doing and how does that work link to creating value for customers for your clients?
Sure. So as a background, I work for an AI company called Fractal Analytics, which has been there in India for the last 20 years. I've managed the strategy, which includes the M&A piece, opening new geographies, fundraise, and new lines of business. And previous to this, I was the global head of analytics and data science for Cognizant. And I think when I look at this whole change in terms of how analytics, AI is trending today, it's a sea change. If I paraphrase in terms of conversation with prospects and clients, this is how it usually goes. That few years back, it used to be that we are data rich, information poor, insight starved. We are data rich, information poor, insight starved. Can you help solve our problem? And that was fine until few years back. Subtly, we see this, can you help solve our problem has become, can you actually make us take decisions? So I think that's where the significance of AI has become multifold. And of course, it's a journey because at some level, analytics to AI is a continuum in terms of what the client should be doing. And that's where the conversations are changing.
So Samir, while you paint this with the same brush, if you look at Western clients versus Indian clients, and then within Indian clients, you have the large ones and the mid-tier ones, how do you see this response changing? Do you see that the Western clients are actually asking that question to say that, help us make decisions, versus Indian clients saying that, still help me with the legacy data?
Well, I think interestingly, it's a very mixed set of, I would say, response, feelings, and narratives by the clients, because suddenly when a technology wave happens, everyone wants to catch up. And then we forget the Moore's law, because at the end of the day, eventually it's a journey. And what we have seen from the Western, I would say, clients, or the clients which are specifically more mature in analytics AI, it's about very specific to those clients. There is a strategic decision-making aspect versus an approach with a lot of the clients, be it in the US or India, where can you do this gig? Can you do this kind of a project? Can you do this POC? Which to us is more like a kind of a, let's say, approach which is piecemeal. And I think that's where the differentiation is, how strategic is AI to your company and how much significance you can attach by bringing more kind of substance as part of the strategic transformation.
Sure. So maybe just to make this a little interesting and real for the audience, if you could share some use cases that you've tried to solve for your clients on the customer side, whether they were for understanding their customers better and to be able for them to react more faster, or if it was to kind of get those insights from customers and then tweak their backend, because either the products or services need to be tweaked because the market was moving. If you could give some examples from diverse industries, it would be very interesting for the audience.
Sure. So I think one of the example I want to give is something which is interesting, not specific to any industry, but to every listed company. Now, every listed company goes through a kind of a earnings call, a kind of set of shareholders, stakeholders, just looking at the narrative commentary of the CEO. And I'm sure we've never seen a CEO not being bullish about the company, despite the kind of, let's say, challenges they face. And what's happening today, CEOs are also very well rehearsed and tutored. So they are giving a narrative, they are so buoyant, but what they realize today is that the cameras, by virtue of capturing their facial expressions. The whole aspect of the voice, which is coming in terms of any modulation, any kind of, let's say, lump in the throat, could be a sign of the weakness. Now, the fact is, CEOs are well tutored here, so all these can be faked. So in a moment, you can say the AI doesn't work because image, voice, text, and video is not in sync. But AI is smart over there, because what happens in every earnings call, you have the CEO in front, and there are a bunch of CXOs at the back. A CFO, a chief finance officer, a chief legal compliance, you got the CMO and all. Now, imagine a situation where the CEO is bullish about something and kind of talking about sequential growth and all, and maintaining a very kind of a good buoyancy, but the CFO at the back is straight poker-faced. Now, this is happening real time. Catching those two expressions, linking, one can construe that there's something wrong over there happening. Second example, which I want to give, and this is more to the retail aspect side, that a few years back, we used to capture a lot of satellite imagery data to capture the footfalls of the store in terms of the cars and all. I think it's gone beyond that, where it's become mainstream, very cliche to look at the footfalls, but some of the retailers, specifically in US, what they're trying to do is they're looking at that data on a real-time basis, where they're looking at what kind of cars are parked in terms of the model, make, the density of the cars at any given point of time, the time the cars have been parked, and then trying to extrapolate those data points to the next quarter earnings call in terms of projections. So that's the quantum jump you see in terms of what I say, distilling kind of really signals from the noise is happening. The last, which is interestingly what I say, a combination where sometimes we say artificial intelligence is not enough, because you can bring the best of the techniques, the tools, but somewhere the models, algorithms don't work. And that's where we have this theory, which I always say, how do you incorporate the human behavior? Now, we realized in one of our large retail stores in UK, the ice cream sales were not jumping. I mean, they tried doing multiple things in terms of changing the whole placement of the ice cream vending machines, running campaigns, but it didn't change. So suddenly they realized that, look, data is fine, but there's something missing. So they deployed a behavioral science expert marrying the data. And this gentleman just deployed a jingle in that part of the store where the ice creams were kept. And that jingle is synonymous with the kind of jingle we used to hear in our childhood, where you then get lured in terms of buying those ice cream. 3 months down the line, the sales jump by 24%, just by a simple jingle and looking at the data in terms of where it needs to be. So those are, I would say, examples which are, to me, I think it's marrying AI with behavioral science, data, then creating a kind of a magic for the clients.
No, awesome examples. I think really insightful. Coming to a question that, you said CXOs would love to take decisions based on AI, based on data-backed systems. There are also certain cultural nuances that we've seen, in West versus East, where in the Indian system, typically there's a lot of trust in the people rather than data, and there are cultures where they typically mistrust data and trust people over data. How do you see that changing across the world?
No, I think it's very really pertinent and very timely question, because eventually any sophistication in technology is always marred by what I say, the regulations, the privacy and other kind of deterrents. Because I've been into this analytics AI for the last 20 years, and we've always had issues and challenges around data privacy. But the fact is, the industry is still on a very upside curve. But coming back to your point, I think it's pertinent to understand, one, the stakeholder who's holding the budgets for AI/ML or analytics. Decision makers sometimes in the organization could be CIOs, could be a chief analytics officer, could be even a CMO, or a kind of, I would say, different business head. One, understanding the nuances in terms of culture is important, but what is also important is understanding what organization wants to achieve by deploying the best of these technologies and techniques. Because often in this whole midst of tools, technology, we'll forget what the problem the client is wanting to solve. And that's where I think the first esotericness comes in when you're facing a client, you build a kind of a right approach, then the client said, look, this is not what I talked about. And I think that's the first kind of, a, let's say, red flag comes in. The second piece is about, to the point what you said, culturally, I think there is also a shift happening where the value chains of the businesses today is getting deconstructed. Banking is getting really challenged by fintech, healthcare by health tech, and all the allied industries. Now, what it means is that the foundations of the businesses, one in terms of value chains, needs to be reconstituted. And then we are trying to say how then you can embed the best of the technologies, could be AI, ML, RPA, IoT, into those. That's where it cannot happen if culturally the organization is, what I say, not data or digitally savvy. So that whole set of evangelization, whole set of propagation within the organization needs to be done. I mean, top to bottom, bottom to top, to kind of just look at what you can accomplish through these kind of things.
So I'll ask a related question, and the response might be again different for mature markets versus Indian markets. So this is a journey towards believing the data that's thrown up and the decisions that are suggested, and go with it, right? Where do you see we are in that journey to say that when a decision is given by the system, which is AI enabled, which goes in contradiction to what you believe as a gut feeling, that this is what we should do as a business, we should do as a leadership team, and the data and the AI system say something different, when do you see that people will actually rely more on the system and say that maybe we are wrong because this comes from the data and we should go with what the system is suggesting? Where are we in that spectrum of maturity?
I think it's a tough one, but this is what my, I would say, response on this is. I think as human beings, we are predictably irrational. And I'm not saying that. There is a book by Dan Ariely which talks about human beings being predictably irrational. And the logic is simple, that this is how it goes, that on an average, we take about 60 odd decisions on any given day. Strategic, tactical, operational. What does that have to do after this meeting? What's my career plan? What's the status of my relationships? Some of these decisions we do every day in, day out. Now, majority of these decisions, what we are taking, are influenced by our gut, intuition, and maybe influenced by our spouses, friends, and colleagues. Now, think of this, in today's world, all these decisions, majority of them are being done by algorithms. The whole recommendation piece, I mean, what you go on the link, I mean, I would say Netflix, when you go on the LinkedIn, when you go on, let's say, the Flipkart or the Amazon. Now, these decisions are being influenced by algorithms where suddenly you realize that you are not dependent on your gut and intuition. There is a rationale and there is something which is driven. Now, we can, of course, come to those biases which algorithms have. But the fact over is that when decision making gets driven by algorithms, does humanity, does organization also change in terms of decisions? Yes. Because that's where we are saying that the examples I gave, I mean, there are tons of other examples as well, where we are saying, look, at some level, these decisions will be taken by machines, by algorithms. I mean, the fact today is that whatever we may say, but the error rate of image, voice, text, and video analytics is far more lower of the machines than humans. I mean, take an example of this AlphaGo chess kind of a thing. I mean, our Grandmaster Vishwanath Anand can actually predict 470 moves before an opponent thinks. A machine can do almost 4 million moves in terms of preempting. So imagine the quantum leap we are talking about in terms of machining. Of course, there are challenges, there are those pieces around emotions, empathy, but let's not take out the fact that decision making as a process within the enterprises is now being governed by algorithms, which culturally, which holistically, strategically, operationally will change a lot of ways in terms of how we work, how we perform, and how we function also in terms of our roles, our kind of, let's say, positions, and our also in terms of how we need to reskill as well. So there is a lot of, I would say, nuances attached to this.
Sure, sure. Uh, One more question is, of course, there are traditional sales teams, marketing teams, retail ops teams who tend to know their customers best, and they would believe that they know their customers best, and therefore they've been devising strategies, tactics, operations in the business. How do you see these guys straddling the old techniques with the new techniques, and how is this blending happening?
I think sea change. I think under this whole umbrella of reimagine the customer experience today, if we talk about in the digital side, I think we are looking at a very different marketing scenario in terms of the market activation. Now take a scenario where IPL happens every year, a lot of money at stakes, and ads are popping up every second in the TV channels. Now, for a marketeer to kind of spend that money optimally, there's always a question, okay, how do I get the maximum bang for the buck? And suddenly he finds the CEO next day and he and she asking, look, I did not see your ad. But if the CM was smart, of course, by deploying the best of the techniques, he or she can say, look, you did not look at the whole stadium in terms of the aisles, the galleries, the jersey of the players. The ad was getting displayed somewhere. So those subtle things in terms of how we look at a classic marketing mix modeling from a market activation is changing through AI ML. The second thing around the sales, I think this whole aspect about how the funnel things work, if you take a classic Salesforce kind of a mechanism of sales initiation to conversion. Now the fact over is that with the advent of all these chatbots and really kind of sophisticated algorithm, you know a kind of a filtered responses and what kind of solutions you should be selling to them. And it's coming by virtue of studying your own personalized past leads, what you have generated or engaged with in the last, let's say, 10 years or 20 years with that firm, or let's say, same kind of industry with different firms. That kind of a data is now throwing signals to the sales team in terms of which of those prospects are already in a mode of getting engaged or getting converted. And look at that simplification in terms of decision making.
Sure. So very insightful. I think with about 3 minutes left, I'll open the house for some questions. Please feel free to ask. You won't get this opportunity to get Samir answering your questions, so go ahead. Any questions?
Last session of the day, it's always tough.
Yeah. Looking forward to the dinner. So maybe I'll kind of give you the last cue and might be a message to the audience. So how should one approach in business? So each of these people who are sitting here are practitioners in business. They run their own functions. There's this whole emergence of new tech coming in. And naturally, there'll be some resistance to saying that, how do I deal with all this new stuff that's coming in? What would be an approach for practitioners of the industry to adopt new tech?
I think very valid question, and I think a lot of this kind of a question has always come in from the stakeholders who's actually giving us business. And I think it's not about where we belong in terms of sitting across the table and giving this kind of a, let's say, narrative, but it's all about what industry you are, what kind of disruptions are happening in those industry. If I take a peel of that, let's say we talk about retail, big disruption happening in terms of omni-channel, physical format versus digital format, personalization, a lot of these things are on fluid supply chain. Now, if we deconstruct the value chain of the entire retail industry, start looking at in terms of what would be the new value chain in terms of the future of work or in terms of the new industry, and look at what kind of new technologies, whether it's AI, IoT, RPA, blockchain are coming in, what impact they are actually kind of providing. What is left is what I say a new, really revamped kind of a, let's say, industry called Retail 2.0. Now, if you are able to figure out that particular thing, you also then will have answers in terms of what roles then you can play in this Retail 2.0 industry. And that's where I think the roles are getting redefined in terms of not just technology-enabled roles, but also in terms of, do you understand the new domain of this industry in the digital world? And I think that's where the new evolution of reskilling is happening. A lot of new roles will actually mushroom in the time to come.
Thanks a lot, Samir. I think we are up. No, I think there were there were no questions. I asked the question on their behalf. Thank you so much. On that good advice, we end the session. Thank you so much for patient listening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Just wanted to inform the audience here that the bar is open outside on the left-hand side, and we need some changeover time to merge both the halls. At around 7 in the evening, we are starting a very exciting entertainment program. I request all of you all to please come and attend that. It will be in this hall. These halls are getting combined. In the meanwhile, you can start off on a couple of drinks, and then we can recongregate here at 7 in the evening to be on the safe side. But we need to empty this hall now because we'll be merging both these halls together. Please stay back. We are just felicitating our esteemed speakers. Please.